Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the difficult slow after lunch when everyone's filled themselves up with nice soup and sandwiches, and normally you'd go for a walk or have some coffee at least. Now, I haven't had coffee, but I hope others have managed to get some coffee, and I'll get some at some point. My name is Eleanor Shaw. I sit on one of the advisory groups, working closely with Open UK around themes relating to sustainability. I am a Professor of Entrepreneurship at Strathclyde Business School in Glasgow, which is a technical university. So for us, all things, as you can imagine, technology are of much excitement to us. So it's a delight to be here with you all this afternoon. We have 2 sessions in the entrepreneurship track this afternoon, so please feel free to join us for both of those if you would like to. My job is really, very loud when I go there, my job is really just to introduce the panel and try to keep us to time and to facilitate things as and when we can. As a researcher, for me, open means open data, and I appreciate that the open is much, much broader than that, but much of the work that I've been involved with over the past couple of years has been around providing open access to academic research, so it's not hidden behind a paywall, that actually we can release the research, the R&D that's happening within universities and make that freely available for all, and I think that's really important. And likewise, as a researcher, having freely available open access to data really helps myself and my colleagues pull together different data sets, combine them in different ways, and come up with some really interesting findings to knotty, gnarly problems that we otherwise would not be able to find solutions for. So one of the things that I'm involved with just now is the fairly recently launched Gender Index, and what that is doing is making freely available all sorts of data relating to the types of companies that are founded and led by women operating out of the UK. It might seem really odd that that data isn't freely available, but until the Gender Index was launched, that data was not freely available. So just to be able to have that means we can now start to have meaningful conversations with policymakers with the hope of evidence-based policy rather than policy that's developed on, because a politician thinks it's a good thing to do. Wouldn't it be nice to have policy actually developed and implemented because there is evidence supporting that policy is actually going to have an impact? So that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about. Please allow me to do some very brief introductions. Matt is the co-pilot on this room. Matt is the founder of JetStack. Matt, I don't know if you want to say a few more words.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Matt Barker. I grew up in Rochdale, North Manchester, which is the home of the Co-op. I learned a lot about cooperative businesses, and it's also rains a lot in Rochdale, so no surprise I got into open source and then the cloud. I ended up joining a couple of open source businesses. Actually, Amanda was my legal counsel when I was in sales, and I worked with her on a number of deals. I then worked early employee at MongoDB in sales. I was there for a few years, back in their very early days, and I basically decided to take the plunge and start my own company off the back of the open sourcing of Kubernetes, and created a company called JetStack, which is a bootstrapped service company around Kubernetes and open source software, cloud native software. In the process, managed to have a little bit of a lucky break and create an open source project that became a de facto standard part of the Kubernetes deployment, which is Cert Manager, a way to manage TLS certificates in Kubernetes, which is now downloaded millions of times a day. Amanda wrote me in to help with becoming the entrepreneur in residence at Open UK. I'm really passionate about helping new founders start companies and in the space, and try to help to encourage them, mentor them, hopefully make them big successes. And I'm really pleased to be part of today, and I'm going to be asking a few questions because a lot of these topics I've struggled with myself. They've been really difficult parts of building and running a business, and I'm hoping that we'll learn a lot about how to today build a product.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Matt. That's super. And sitting next to Matt is Avi Press, who is founder and chief executive of Scarf. Welcome, Avi. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure. So let's see. My background is in software development, and I have been working on a variety of open source tools just, for the companies where I was working at, just for fun, and found myself in a position where a lot of companies were using these tools that I was maintaining in my spare time. And I got very frustrated with kind of the lack of data that I as a maintainer had about how my tools are actually being used in practice. Like, what company is using these things? Are they actually using them? Is it really providing value to them? And that's really what got me started down this path of starting Scarf. And so today we work with companies or projects and companies that really want to have a better understanding of how their software is actually being used, the impact that it has. And so we work with a lot of companies that are kind of running into all of these sorts of problems of finding success and actually finding success that is proportional to the value that they are creating in the wild.
Okay. Thank you, Abby. Thanks, and welcome to the panel. And sitting next to Abby, we have Bram, who is Chief Exec of Baserow. Welcome. Would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Yeah, thank you, of course. So I'm Bram. I'm the CEO, founder of Baserow. So Baserow is an open source, no-code online database tool and an Airtable alternative. So my background is in software engineering. I started Baserow about 4 years ago, purely as a side project because I love to have side projects. And it has kind of grown into a venture-backed startup. We're currently a team of 16 people. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to the panel. And then sitting next, we have Sam Weaver, Chief Exec of Plural. Welcome, Sam, and if you'd like to say a few words of introduction.
Thanks, yeah, thanks for having me. So my background, also technology, computer science degree. I worked at IBM for a little bit, about 3 months actually, so not very long at all. And it was primarily working on mainframes. And I realized it was my first experience of a really closed source ecosystem, and I didn't enjoy it. So I left, I went to Red Hat, and I spent the next over a decade in open source. Joined Matt actually early at MongoDB and spent the next 7 years there building Atlas, which is the SaaS-hosted MongoDB database service. I was the head of product at a company called Uncork in New York City, spent 8 years living out in New York, and then a year and a half ago now, co-founded Plural. Plural aims to elevate DevOps teams out of the headache of running open source software in a self-hosted way. Production-ready stand-up of infrastructure on Kubernetes, all the monitoring, logging, user management, auth, etc., things that are tricky around deploying open source software. We're 14 people, we are venture-backed, and excited to be here and get into the conversation.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Sam. Thank you. So the way that this is going to work, we're going to have about 45 minutes or so, a little bit more if we choose to, of panel discussion and Q&A. We've got some support with the Q&A, Matt. We've got access.
We've got Beth here who's waving.
Great.
And it's quite dark out there, but I think John's around somewhere. Oh, there he is. So they'll be around with mics, and love to keep it interactive, so please feel free to ask questions at any point and get involved with the discussion. Yeah,
and if you want to join the questions at Slido, you can. And of course, you can upvote and things, and we'll keep attention to that and make sure that we address those burning issues that you have. After that, we're going to invite you to work together in conversations around your tables. And we might need to do a little bit of moving around at that point just to make sure we've got sufficient people on each of the tables. And we'll give you around maybe 30 minutes or so to have a conversation. We'll have some founders in discussing with you. And then after that, we'll ask you to feedback for us what perhaps were the top issues that came up for you during your discussions. We've never done this before, so if we decide to change things up a little bit or the timings go in a slightly different direction, then that's fine too. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks
to start
very much. Yeah. So let's kick it off. I remember the moment where I actually changed my LinkedIn profile to say that I was a founder of a company, and I was absolutely terrified. We've talked a little bit about the fact that you've all started companies and a little bit about what they do, but can you tell me a little bit about the trigger point for what made you actually decide to start a company? Aviv, do you want to kick us off?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that, let's see. So Scarf first started really just as a side project. So it was something that I was trying to start a business around, these other developer tools, and I was really struggling to do that, and kind of thinking very systemically about what the problems with that, what that was. And at the time, I decided to just do a lot of writing around this and talk to a lot of people around this. And over time, I really built a lot of conviction around, around kind of the ideas that Scarf turned into, about that, open source projects should really have better metrics around how their work is being used. And so for a while, Scarf really was just in kind of side project mode. Okay. But eventually, I was in a position where, maybe we can start actually, selling stuff that was kind of on the platform. And right around the time where a company wanted to actually purchase something, and this was back when Scarf was a completely different product. We had since pivoted, but around the time where we needed to actually funnel money from one place to another, we should probably incorporate. If I'm incorporating, maybe I should just kind of really, really lean into this. But I kept it very stealthy for a while, and then kind of once I started to build a network in the venture capital space and someone was offering the first check, that was when I really decided I needed to super lean into it and really be public about the fact that I was starting a business.
So you say it started as a side project.
Yeah.
Bram, did your company start as a side project?
Yeah, definitely.
It did? Okay.
It started as a side project, yeah. So it was when I learned about Airtable for the first time, which is an amazing tool, especially if you have like a software engineering background. You immediately see the potential of a tool like that. And then I saw a lot of chatter in communities like Hacker News or Indie Hackers, and people were all saying like, hey, we need an open source or self-hosted alternative to Airtable because I want to host my data myself instead of on their servers. So there was no grand plan or anything. I just thought, cool, that's going to be my side project. So I worked on it for like a year, and I had a lot of public pages and was very transparent about what I was doing. And I launched the first version, saw a lot of traction happening, and that's when I decided, hey, I want to put some more time in this project.
Were you actually in a full-time job when you were doing it?
Yeah, I was working.
So you managed that on the side, okay.
So that's why it took a year, and yeah, contrary to most startups, it's I put a lot of time in writing high quality code because that's what I like to do. So it took like a year. I worked on it in the evenings and the weekends. It took like a year to launch the first version. And when you see the traction happening, people are getting excited. You get on the first page on Hacker News. That's a nice moment to say, okay, I'm gonna invest some more time in this.
And tell me honestly, did you game the system so you could get on the first page of Hacker News, or was it completely by chance?
No, I think it was like a Saturday evening, and I was, or I'm not sure when it was. I was already laying in bed, and I was like, wow, I see a lot of signups coming in the hosted version that we have. So I opened analytics and I saw Hacker News as a source. So I thought, okay, what's happening? So someone else actually posted it. And then I think we had like 1,000 or 1,500 signups in a couple of days, compared to like 4 per day. So that was a lot.
It's an amazing feeling when that happens. And Sam, how about yourself?
A little bit different for me, actually. So I didn't build the Plural technology. My co-founder, Michael, did. And he's so his background is Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, career sort of FANG engineer. And he'd been solving the same problems at each company. I think at Facebook, he'd got a little bored and a little disillusioned with what the work was there. And so in his spare time, side project, had started building what is now Plural. For me, actually, I'd always sort of trended towards startup. I knew eventually I was going to start something. Wasn't quite sure what that was going to be yet. And it felt like you could get to a point where you just kept kicking that can down the road until you never got to it. And so I thought, well, what better time than now? I was the head of product at Uncork at the time, and we'd scaled from, I was employee number 10, coming in, and we'd scaled up to 800 people in about 3 years. So it was pretty aggressive growth. Uncork is a no-code platform. And what I realized at 800 was I like building things. And at 800, I'm not building, I'm kind of the politician, you know, and so I wanted to get back into smaller stuff. I also had a pretty generous share package that I wanted to see out at Uncork, and so what I thought would be a good way of sort of getting back to building in my spare time was being an advisor for venture capital. Okay. And so portfolio companies for VCs would come and get advice from me, and actually that's how I met my co-founder and took the leap. It was a year and a half ago.
Okay, so obviously the one consistent thing about all three of you is that all of your companies are based on open source software. You obviously had the choice not to base it on open source software. What is it about open source software that helped you to create your businesses? Does someone want to pick it up? Bram, maybe? Go ahead.
For us, it was really like a business decision at some point. Kind of, if you want to compete with Airtable and they're like 8 years ahead in terms of features, you're never going to be able to catch up. So it was kind of, you see people in the community asking for it. And then at some point you also realize, okay, but there's a whole different market segment that you can reach, in our case, that Airtable cannot reach. It's more like the enterprise market. They're much more confident in using open source software because if they spend a lot of time on implementing something and our product or company cease to exist or we get acquired or whatever happens, then they still have the source code so they can still continue with it. So for us it was like a business decision, I would say, to build an open source product.
It was a business decision, and it sounds like it was to try and shortcut the amount of time it was going to take you to get productive. Is that kind of what it was, or?
No, yeah, I guess it's different. A different target audience can use the product because they want to self-host, because they have strict IT requirements. They cannot store the data on the servers of Airtable.
So it was specifically, it was almost like a competitive move against the pre-existing incumbents?
Yeah, I guess you could see it that way. It's you just can sell or to a different target audience, I would say.
Interesting. And Sam?
Yeah. So ours was sort of by necessity. We orchestrate and deploy open source software. Think of infrastructure like queues, databases. Actually, probably even your product would be a fit, but it's effectively a marketplace. Any open source software that you want to deploy and add to the store, you can. And so if we're doing that with open source software, we kind of need to be open source ourselves. It kind of goes without saying. I think beyond that, though, the ability for us to land into mature places earlier and easier than if we're a closed source ecosystem there's a greater chance of it. It's easier to turn up and say, hey, we're open source, we've got a couple of thousand stars, people are contributing, you can see the source code, you can run scans on the source code, we don't have to walk you through exactly how we're doing the things, you can see for yourself. The chances of people adopting us actually get higher with that model.
So am I right in thinking that you almost view it as a really good distribution?
Correct.
In some ways. And
yep.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of cases where there's really just no other option. Like, so for Scarf, the very first thing that I built that actually took off was an NPM library, and it was for specifically analytics for NPM packages, and there's no way to not have it be open source. And so we've had an approach of just open sourcing pretty much everything that makes sense to, which is not 100% of what we've built by any stretch. But one way that I've thought about this before is, if you're trying to make that call of should we open source versus not, one question I like to ask is, well, what would you do if someone else came out with the open source version of what you were building, and how would that impact your business? And I think for most of the things that we built, that would not be a tolerable outcome, and so we must open source stuff because that's really like the culture of the kinds of people that we help, and so it really, I think, both from a product market fit standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, from a distribution standpoint, there's just a mounting number of reasons why that made sense for us.
Yeah. There's a couple of large implications, I think, in what you're saying there around competing and competition using your open source software. But just to hand over to you, Bram, were you thinking about the implications of using open source and maybe what might be proprietary, what might not be, and the impact perhaps of the license as well? Could you talk a little bit about what your ideas were off the back of a successful open source project, and then now when you start to think about commercializing it?
Yeah, no, for sure. So we launched our enterprise offering a couple of months ago, but we had like a clear path, or at some point we had like a clear path of what kind of business model we want to have. So like 85% of the source code of Baseflow is MIT licensed. It's open source, and because we expect that a lot of users are going to self-host, you need to be able to monetize that self-hosted version. So we came up with like a premium version which has additional features, and we have like an enterprise version with additional features more focused at larger organizations with features like single sign-on, role-based access control, audit log, things like that. So we have like a per user per month price basically, where they need to get like a license from us, pay that, install that license in their self-hosted version to unlock those features. But yeah, we do make the source code public, right? So the premium and the enterprise source code, it's all publicly visible, but it has a proprietary software license. Some people would say it's a risk to like show all the source code because people could easily hack it, right? You could, maybe I should not say it in public, but you can easily change a couple of lines of code and use the enterprise version for free. But those people who do that, they would not pay for it anyway, or they might want to try it out without finding a legal route for that.
We are actually being live streamed here. So
I know.
And bro, how did you decide which features to include in the enterprise version versus the premium? Because, and obviously it's only 3 months, so I guess what are you learning from the landing of those features at this point?
Yeah, and so we have like 2 paid offerings. So we have like a premium offering that we launched about 8 or 9 months ago, and like the enterprise offering like 3 months ago or so. And so it's always difficult to figure out which features are you going to make paid, because if you're building, if you make it open source and you launch it under like an MIT license, you cannot move it to the enterprise version. So you really need to think about it well and basically be on the safe side, like launch it paid and then make it free after, if that makes sense. But you kind of, yeah, as I said, if you want to focus on large organizations, you figure out what kind of features do they need. So you think about that, but you also think about the complexity and the size of the feature. Like, if you compare it to Airtable, for example, they have like some tiny features. Like if you fill out a form and you want to redirect the user to another page, it's a paid feature. For us, it doesn't make sense to make that paid because it's really simple to build it as a plugin or to add it to the code. So we focus on like the bigger features, like a Kanban view, for example, to make that paid, and the smaller things are free because people can easily replicate that via plugin. But yeah, it's difficult. Like we had some questions in our community about making a specific role in the role-based access control, make that free. But it's a small change, but it's still, it still depends on who you're going to sell to, on whether or not you want to make that free or paid. And you cannot reverse the decision. Exactly. So you need to think about it really well.
Sam, how do you think about the difference between what's open source and what's paid for in your product?
Yeah, so actually you can do it. It's been done famously badly. You can make a backtrack on it. Elastic did it with the Elastic license. MongoDB did it with the SSPL, and then they reverted it. It generally is not good good thing to do with the community. You get a lot of pushback, but I think if you can manage it. For us, the thing was a choice between did we want to monetize as quickly as possible, or did we want fast product development to get us to a point where we had sort of what we would consider a really strong MVP that we knew people wanted. So we wanted the latter, actually. We didn't start with, a hugely popular open source project. We started with a side project. We knew that it had use, but we weren't quite sure what value levers we needed to pull to extract sort of like maximum monetization out of it. And so what we said we would do, let's open source everything. And we put out in the wild from day zero everything we had out there. And we said, we're just going to see how people are using this product. We're going to take the feedback that we get. It's going to be ungated, right? Nobody's going to need to pay us to use a certain feature, which means that like only a small amount of people are going to use it and we don't get feedback on it. We're going to get feedback across this whole product. We're going to see where people use it, where they don't use it, where we can make it better. And from that, what we started to see was emerging patterns around people that were, as I said, we let people deploy applications. We didn't want to put a gate in the number of applications because there was no consistent pattern that said like person who installed 50 applications got any more value than somebody who installed 5. could be 5 really high-profile applications, right, or 50 like tiny ones. But what we saw was when you start adding users, more users, and those users start having roles and permissions, and it looks like you're working in teams and you're collaborating on stuff, well, that would indicate you're a business abstracting business value out of our product. And so that was how we started to then think about, actually, you know what, everybody should have as many applications as they want, but when you get to the point of separating by roles and permissions, that's when we're going to start charging you. So we've just put that in place. Actually, that product release, we call that our self-service tier. You sign up with a credit card on it. That drops on Friday. But we've had an air quotes enterprise release for a while, and that encompasses things like encryption at rest and Active Directory sync, all the things you would need as a larger organization to use a product. This was something we had learned, I guess. I mentioned I was at MongoDB for 7 years building product there. It was something we had learned at Mongo. Our biggest competitor was our own open source product. We couldn't monetize our open source product because people didn't need us when we were just a database, and it was all the things around it that they needed. They needed the tools to manage the database. They needed user management. They needed tools to be able to see what their data was in there. And so those were the things we started to build and say that's what you would pay for. But the core product itself, the database, was always going to be free. And so it's kind of just the MongoDB playbook, I suppose, yeah.
Can I turn the conversation in a slightly different direction? So we're moving, if you like, from project to product. You've spoken about business models. So I'm interested in that move from designing to leading and then growing a company and employing people, and how you found all of that, because it's, to me, it's quite a different skill set. Mm-hmm. So I see you smiling and laughing.
Yeah, it's a really big adjustment for sure. Yeah. I mean, I was someone that would write code every waking minute of the day, and now I don't write so much code these days. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's definitely flexing a very different muscle. But I've personally always had a mentality of just really wanting to just ship stuff quickly and talk to people and just figure out kind of the most impactful things I can do with that. And so, even for probably longer than the advice I was getting, I was still writing code because that was the fastest way that I could, make good on some user requests that I was getting. But over time, that just naturally builds up to more and more things, and you just can't do it by yourself. And so, I think I've always had just like a very customer or user focus on this, and just try to do the most impactful thing I can. And as that became more than I could do, well, I got to hire people. Well, I have to raise more money, or whatever that happens to look like. And so that's something that has even lasted until now. Like really, the way that I think about like, well, what should I do today is really, well, like what would be the most impactful use of the time after whatever fires have to be put out when you wake up. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Bram, how about you?
Yeah, it's very relatable. My background is also in software engineering, so I spent a lot of time on writing code, building the product, and as like the lead developer in your own team, you kind of know all the code, you know where everything is. So after I raised like the first investment round, you're kind of slowly starting to write less code every day and focus more on like the business and hiring people. So yeah, I guess the turning point was really when I raised some investment. Got some more developers on board who would help me, and I was very involved with the developers, like making sure that they know the ins and outs of the code base so that you can leave it in capable hands. But yeah, it's slowly getting less development, which is different.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, how about you?
Well, I mean, as a product person, so I wasn't writing code, but as a product person, my natural instinct is to be in the product all day, every day, and really understand the rough edges. And I think the flip for CEO or founder is, you got to rise above the minutia, and it's hard. Everybody falls into minutia. You got to rise above it and look at what is the macro, competitive market look like? What's the funding market look like? Where do we want to be in 6 months' time, 12 months' time? What do I need to do to get us there? And so it's a very different way of thinking. For us, when we had gone to raise our investment round, so we're venture-backed out of the US. We've raised $7 million as a seed company. And our sort of plan was to raise that very early. I mean, I had joined the company, me and Michael had founded it for a month before we went and raised.
Yeah,
And so there's 3 things, 2 of 3 things need to be true to go and raise. Team, high quality team, vision, and or a lot of traction. Mm-hmm. And so we were a month in, we didn't have the traction. We had team and vision. And so I think between my background, Michael's background, and the thing that we were tackling, we're able to go raise. But you can do that with an open source project that is already flying off the shelves. You've got traction. So now do you have a vision around that thing and where it goes? Or do you build a team around that thing? And if you've got all 3, I mean, you're looking at a great investment round. So those are the sort of like 3 things that I had considered. Also hadn't considered in my mind was just, it felt like the thing to get done was do the investment round to build the team. And when you see the money hit the bank account, there's now suddenly an overwhelming sense of dread that you actually have to, you got to go deliver on this, right? Somebody's given you a check for $7 million, you got to do something with it. And so having a very clear plan of where we were going to spend that money and what milestones we wanted to do to hit the next round of money. And so that's what we've been executing on, is just focus on building a great team, never sort of like veering from our vision unless there was a strong signal to show that there was an entry for a product in some place we hadn't yet thought of. And that is the least pressure you're ever going to have, is that first check, because it just gets harder and harder to hit the milestones you need to get further funding.
I mean, I've worked with many, many early stage founders, and very rarely have I heard that raising that first amount of money was the easy part. So that's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
But did you guys find that as well? Did you find that? Yeah.
I guess raising the money, it's a lot of, if you have like some traction with your open source product and you have a vision on commercializing it, a lot of investors want to invest. At least that's what I experienced. So that was the easy part, I would say.
And Avi as well?
I mean, not that there isn't, an overwhelming sense of like accomplishment and relief. Like, it's a big milestone for sure, but raising the first amount of money is much more storytelling than it is like getting into numbers and like looking at a lot more hard realities of the business. And so, the farther you go, the more transactional it gets, and in a lot of ways, the harder it will get. But I think, I think oh wow, there's money in here suddenly, like it's go time, is there's definitely an amount of existential dread that can come with that, certainly.
Okay. Should we see if anybody wants to ask any questions? It is difficult for us to see up here because the lights are shining on us and you're quite dark, but thank you, that's great. There we go, there's a question there.
Hey guys. So would you say that open source is really a distribution strategy for you? Because the way that, I hear all 3 of you talking, like, and for Mongo, this was, I think they just came out and said it, open source was a distribution strategy, but it doesn't sound like you're getting, are you getting that much community involvement in actually collaboration for developing it? Or so what, if it's not a distribution strategy, what else does open source bring to you?
Who wants to take it?
Why don't each of you take it?
I'll give you my perspective. So in my view is there isn't a world whereby open source isn't the dominant sort of way for people to build software, and not based on distribution, but just based on the fact it's a better way to build software. So if that's my universal truth, like I personally would not buy or use proprietary software for a lot of things. There's the odd exception where I can't get as good an open source version, but I'm always looking and scouting for that. And so, do I have an iPhone? Yes, I do have an iPhone, yes. There's, as I said, there's some exceptions where I'm not happy with the alternatives. But I feel like for me, the distribution strategy is more on, it's more a way to get traction. Yes, you can get traction out of an open source project faster than you can out of a commercial project. But I actually think the method of building the software is better, and so that's why we prefer to be open source.
Ram?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, especially on like the quality of the code itself. If you make it open source, you often make it modular as well, for example, which improves like the code quality. But yeah, it's a way of distributing your product, of course, but it also makes it more accessible to other people. So, yeah.
I'd also add that it is a way of ensuring that what you build is going to stick around, I think, for a lot longer. You know, I think the things that, if your goal is to have a lasting impact and to have a lot of longevity, I think an open source strategy is going to be a much better recipe to actually deliver on that. And you know, I think Scarf's kind of a different example in a little bit, because we actually are largely working with open source projects, and so there's really no alternative for us, rather, to really buy full into that methodology. But yes, I do think it is both a distribution channel that is, you know, a very robust one, but it's also just like a whole cultural and methodology of to just how you run your business as well, that I think can provide a lot of value.
Thank you, Abby. I think we have another question, gentleman in the middle here.
So I'm quite new to open source, but I'm just very aware that it aligns with a lot of my values. So I guess, Abby, you mentioned something about culture, and I guess a reason for using open source. And I'm just wondering if you guys could expand on that, and maybe like kind of what values come with it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one is, you know, building very authentic trust with the people who you are building for. I think, you know, ease of use and being, you know, consistent with the values that you have, just being very upfront about being very clear about what they are, being upfront about what they are, and, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean never changing them, but being very, you know, open with your community about what that is. I guess really just like openness broadly. I think that building that kind of relationship with the people who you are servicing in any kind of way is just one that is built to last.
Yeah, and I guess it's also like a guarantee for your promises. You're kind of promising things as a company, and because you give them the code, you give them you give them the product basically, so they could always use it and by themselves. Even if you don't hold up onto your promises, it's still there, right? So it's a level of trust, I would say.
I want to add something after.
Just add to that, so the consumers I'm thinking about are probably not coders in any way. They are farmers, which might be as far away from coders as you can get. And building that trust in technology is a challenge. And it sounds really good what you're saying. I'm just wondering if your consumers are not deeply technical themselves. Just another angle, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. So if you've got it out there, but you're engaging with a community that doesn't have the skills, the knowledge, the experience, how do you overcome that?
I think that's an interesting way. So I'll answer it in two ways. One is like, so I've worked a lot with people like John Deere in farming, and they're very progressive actually in technology. And a lot of farmer tech is coming out that enables farmers to get better yields for their crops, etc. And so I think generally, if you're talking to a group of people that are not technically oriented, it's around what is the benefits for them. I don't know if open source necessarily is a direct benefit for them, but I think building the ecosystem that is based around open source is a benefit for them. And that is, there are other people in the ecosystem who are technical, who understand the problem set, who want to extend the great software that you're building, and can do so without needing to really be held back by your product development or your roadmap, etc. They can do that themselves. And that adds a lot of value to the end product and to the end user.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I'd point out with kind of thinking about, like, you know, what is the benefit of open sourcing this or not, I'm not someone that will say you should open source everything all the time. There's a lot of great reasons to not open source something. But if you're really committed to solving the problem, I think that open source kind of forces you into have a non-zero sum mentality about the problem that you're solving. If, for instance, if I start to see GitHub and, you know, these big companies start to give more analytics to maintainers, I would love to see that. It would give more competition to Scarf, but that would be much better for the open source community, and I'm kind of trying to align myself where if, you know, the open source community is doing well, then Scarf will do well. And I think that if you're really committed to that kind of thinking about the problem that you're solving, it will naturally shift you towards a more open source kind of mindset on what you're doing. But if you are not building for a technical audience that can take advantage of like the code nature of that, then that it could be a good reason to maybe not open source something as well. It depends.
Just a caveat, or actually for someone who's maybe looking at starting a company using open source in the farming industry, we've heard from Sam, John Deere, quite ahead of the curve. What would stop someone like John Deere taking the great work that he does in open source and then maybe reusing it or creating their own product set, to your point around maybe deciding to close it or add features or maybe forking it? Is there something that this gentleman can think about to maybe protect his interests down the line if it was a knockout success and all of a sudden some farming giant comes along and takes the open source code and tries to do something with it themselves?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a risk in open source for sure. And we saw this at MongoDB. Matt and I were chatting about it earlier. Was plenty of people created MongoDB spin-offs, and but there's a couple of things. One, licenses. Work with a great open source lawyer who's going to put the right license on the product for you. Two is you're the one with a vision, and three, really is the risk for our code is all out there. Even our enterprise pieces is out there. And the bet we're making is, doesn't matter who has our code, they got to execute on it. And we got to execute on building the business ourselves. But we built that platform, we have our vision, and we know our roadmap to execution. We're already ahead of anybody else that's going to take that code and run with it. So I think in that sense, it's better. If there's people out there, to your point, doing what you're doing, is validation that what you're doing is the right thing. If they want your thing, it's the right thing. And there's things you can do to sort of protect yourselves, but just focus on executing. I think that's the biggest thing.
Okay, any other questions from the floor? Okay, another one over here.
Thank you. I think you've all talked a little bit about bringing users into your open source projects. How do you all think about bringing new contributors in? So I think that's kind of the interesting other side of that flywheel, right? When your software is open source, other people can come in and create an issue and say, like, this thing bothers me. CEO, go and fix this. But a lot of people actually follow that up with a pull request, right? And they fixed the issue because later that night they figured, why don't I just fix it and I'll make this thing better for everyone? So how have you all kind of thought about your developer ecosystem around your projects, external contributors? How you nurture that and how that fits into your kind of business strategy?
Yeah, I could answer this one. For us, contributions are always welcome, of course, and it seems like, hey, people are doing a lot of free work. But for us, it's always it's a lot of work that needs to be reviewed by the internal development team. Sometimes there's a lot of back and forth, and then people stop contributing basically before finishing the feature. So in our the way how we look at things, sometimes it costs more work to get a feature in, and we have a specific roadmap as well. Like if we make a planning for the next 4 weeks and specific developers are going to work on specific features, and then someone contributes something big or small, it needs to be reviewed, so you need to allocate time for that as well. Sometimes it's not up to standards, what we typically see is that users who are very frequently using the product, who have forked the repository, made changes, made plugins, they can provide high quality pull or merge requests. Those are very welcome, but you also see people who just want to contribute a bit, and it's much appreciated, but that sometimes costs much more work than implementing it ourselves, and it makes us spend less time on building our own roadmap. So it's a bit mixed, I would say.
I think it's a fine balance. Obviously, we love it. We love when people contribute to the product. It shows that they care enough about it that they want to extend it. I think there's a fine line between, nobody likes coming into a community of anything and somebody tells them they're an idiot or what they've done is crap or anything like that. And so we do see people that are just beginning their coding journey and that they want to join in on something that they're passionate about. They put a pull request in, maybe it's not up to standard. We try and find the right balance of educating them, helping them get to the place where it is a good pull request, and hopefully enabling them to do more contributions and or just be a better citizen in the open source community. So we also get a lot of high quality stuff. I mean, people that are really, really accomplished engineers are putting stuff in, which is awesome. I think in terms of nurturing it, I mean, we find actually, obviously developers like to find their own software. They don't like being marketed at, they don't like being prescribed things. And so what we like to do is just put thought pieces out. Here's how we think about running things at scale on Kubernetes. And that engagement, those thought pieces we put out there are the things that drive people to the code base to check it out and then hopefully contribute.
Can I ask, is that also a source of you identifying talent that you want to come and work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've actually hired 2 people that were contributors for us.
So that's another fantastic way. So it's not just that distribution network, but it is that community and talent spotting and all of these other things. Yeah. Okay.
I've actually got a follow-up question to that, because one thing that I've found is that obviously we've done a lot to nurture the cert manager community, and it's just by product of being a good community steward, being welcoming, opening. A lot of hard work to get the cert manager project to the point where it creates a lot of value. Then what we've started to see is third-party companies, so the likes of Red Hat, Google, Cloudflare, VMware, all now starting to contribute to our project. So it does happen. It's just keep chipping away, I'd say. Keep focusing on providing value with the project and just being open, embracing of the community, and be a good community steward. One thing I'd quite like to ask the panelists is, you end up in some ways with 2 split brain, with a team of people focusing on the open source that you might not be harvesting value directly from, and then maybe another team that's got to think very carefully about how to monetize that code, perhaps with proprietary features and functionality. Do you split those developers so that they're working on both the open source code and the commercial code, or do you actually have the same developer who's doing both? Because sometimes there can be a little bit of conflict of interest in some ways.
Yeah.
Bram, do you want to?
Yeah, for us, we mainly work with full stack developers, and sometimes they work on proprietary features, sometimes they work on open source features. Often when they work on a proprietary feature, there's also a lot of changes in the open source side of things. So it's very, very mixed. We try to have a healthy balance of releasing open source features and proprietary features every month. But especially in the beginning, it was only open source, and later on, when we were building our enterprise offering, it was a little bit more enterprise, but we typically want to find the right balance.
Okay, so engineers are doing both?
Yes, they're doing both.
And is that the same from what you've seen?
Yeah, so we have it both as well. We tend to think about it more like, we are building a product, and the software for that product, a lot of it is open source, and kind of it falls out a lot more naturally. And there's obviously kind of front end, back end kind of splits as well, but I tend to try to think about it less in terms of having these kind of butting heads between these 2 sides, and more trying to solve a problem. The software for what you are building can be open source to whatever degree, and however that falls out with your priorities is how it falls out.
Anything to add, Sam, or shall we?
Totally agree.
Great, thanks. I think there's a question at the back there.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I'm curious to think about what is the end game for open source projects. Of course, if I've heard earlier, you have investors and whatnot. Is the end game, is it being bought out and then hoping that buyer doesn't make it private and license it and so forth? Or is it just riding it and seeing just hopefully not getting bought out and hopefully keeping it open source for the end game?
Yeah, is that directed at me or any of us? I think from my perspective, so we believe there's a huge opportunity out there to become the open source standard. There's no standard that exists today around deploying complex distributed systems that's open source infrastructure. There's package managers for it. There's Kubernetes are used in some places, but there's no very clear .deploy type file that somebody can run and you get yourself spun up with all the things you need to be production ready on the get-go, right? And so that's the problem we're solving for. The question would be, could we solve that problem faster or slower with venture money? And so like if we did not go and raise venture money, I don't think we could tackle that problem. We, one, have to establish a bit of a market, and two, we would need to bootstrap the company, find revenue, and get to the point where we could grow a team to really make the impact on the product that we needed to. And so from our perspective, it's like we need to raise venture money to be able to accelerate the development of it. Hopefully the venture capitalists see the same opportunity that we see. And so from our perspective, it's like we want to be a lasting standard. We're not trying to be acquired. If we end up going IPO, that would be great, but those are all outcomes of just a successful product, and we're focused on building a successful product.
Okay, any other views?
I can take it. Yeah. So yeah, I think about it also kind of in terms of the problem and outcome that I'm trying to enact. And so for me and for Scarf, I want to see more companies like yours be very successful and not have to do things like shift a license around just so you can kind of start to do more value capture, but rather to see companies actually build a lot of value, deliver a lot of value, and be successful as a result. So I also thought of it as, okay, well, how do we do that? And then work backwards. And so for us, that was also kind of the venture track because, because we have very substantial infrastructure requirements to be able to, for instance, serve packages and containers around the world very quickly, in production settings. Like, it's very capital intensive and kind of required us to do these kinds of things like raise money. But I think, yeah, in general, when I'm working on pretty much anything, trying to be much more about the problem that I'm trying to solve and seeing the impact that solution might have.
Another question from this gentleman here, and then this lady here.
Yeah, so, great, we have another microphone. So I just want to push you guys a little bit on this, because, I'm a founder, and let's be honest, I want to sell the company. Like, I'm 52, I have 10 more years, right, in the business. At the end of the 10 years, I'm going to have to sell this sucker, right, and monetize. And your venture capital investors, they want their money back faster than probably I do, because I'm an individual. So you have to be honest. The goal of the business is to make money, to achieve a high growth rate, and to have an exit strategy for investors, whether that's IPO or sale. So the answer to the question is yes, they have to sell this company at some point and get those investors their money back. That's part of the deal you sign. But the question that he raised is really a valid one, and it has to be answered by founders. And that question is what happens to the software after you get bought? And what we've done at Glue is we've taken the software and we have moved the software, opened the governance of the software by moving it to the Linux Foundation, where it's now governed by a steering committee of which Glue leads. And still is influential. However, I didn't spend the last 14 years of my life building an open source company to see some Oracle buy it and decide they're not going to publish any more fixes and it's just going to stay fixed in time, which basically means dead. So the question that I would pose to you guys is, yes, benevolent dictatorship makes sense, especially when you own the trademark and you have the, you want to lead the product and have control of the product. But what really is the governance strategy for you to make sure this is always going to be open source?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I can talk from my standpoint, because I've actually been through that myself. JetStack was acquired 3 years ago, and the code that we had was under an Apache 2.0 license, and we were acquired along with the project. And my standpoint on this was that I had a choice as the steward, in some ways, of that project that was connected to the company behind it, which is JetStack, and that was who I sold to. So I know that not everyone gets that opportunity, but I effectively sold to someone who held the same strategic vision as me, and I felt like by going to that company, we could join our companies together, and I know as cheesy as it sounds, but 2 + 2 = more than 4. And what ended up happening is the code got transferred, and there was very, very intense conversation about what we did with the license going forward. And we came to the joint decision that we would actually donate it to the CNCF. So that's actually what ended up happening to our project, is we ended up jointly deciding to donate it to the CNCF. So I would say that as much as you're saying, you know, you don't want some oracle buying it. I mean, in a lot of cases, well, in my case at least, it ended up being a product of like the decision to move into that knowingly and working with a partner that we felt like we could become joint stewards of the project going forward.
Okay, any other views, guys?
I mean, I think Matt's answer was a great answer. I think from my perspective, like, just to like push back on your pushback a little bit, is like Steve Jobs didn't build Apple to IPO, right? He built it to transform the world, design, and all those things around it, and technology. And so, like, I'm not thinking about an exit event. I haven't even considered your question before, because I'm so focused on building a lasting company around what we're trying to do that it's not something I'd thought about. I think Matt has been through it. It's a great answer. Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen the other side too.
Yeah.
That's a great outcome you had,
Yeah.
but I've seen the other side. I've seen Red Hat acquire stuff and end of life it. I've seen companies who decide that they go open source, like ForgeRock, or open source went out the window. So there are good results, but there are also bad results.
It's tough.
Yeah.
That's true.
The only thing I would add to that is, you know, these things do happen within the open source community, but they happen in pharma, they happen in biotech. Yeah, I can't think of any sector where things like that don't happen, where larger organisations deliberately want to buy something because they want to close it down. Not always because they want to acquire it, because they actually want to close it down because it's a nuisance or they see it as a threat. But so I don't think that's what you're talking about is unique to open. I think it can happen across. I can't think of any sector I've worked with where that type of behaviour doesn't exist.
I think in your particular case as well, you're potentially opposed there, because it's like you're building the company to exit within the next 10 years, but at the same time you have criteria on your exit, right? It's like, well, I want to exit in a way that the project can still survive and so on. And so like either you go full force into saying like, well, I exited, I got my share and like whatever happens to the project. Or you say, I really care about the project and you know maybe I can't take the first exit opportunity and I'm going to wait and shop around and do what Matt did and find the right partner for me to take it forward.
I've got to say in my case that it might have been much harder. I mean, I bootstrapped, so it was only me and my business partner that held the decision. If I was under the cosh of some really hardcore investor or VC who was looking to maximize their return, would I have been able to hold up to the pressure of that? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And maybe in some ways, to me, it's actually a lot of the projects that do end up getting their license changed or something maybe not quite happening to it that the community wouldn't want to see in the future. It's partly because I believe it's because of financial pressure. Maybe a founder took a raise too early at too high a valuation. They maybe don't quite get the customers in and the ARR as much as they were hoping to. At that point, you've got one really vocal, like strong investor who's like, we need to get a return on this. We're changing the code, we're changing the license, or we're going to sell to Oracle to make our money back. And that's what I feel can and happen. And I guess as from my standpoint, I took the decision very early on that I was going to think carefully about where what the future was, and I was going to do everything I could to try and avoid that from happening. But that was my individual case. But I do recognise that there are going to be people in slightly different situations and scenarios, depending on what happens in their business and how it ends up landing with particular customers or the market or whether the economy changes. I mean, that's another big thing that can affect it as well.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, this lady here did want to ask a question. I'm sorry.
So we're at 2:05 as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my question for you is, what's the one thing that you feel helped you get initial traction? So building a community or usage?
For me, it was being very, very transparent about everything, like putting up pages, putting up roadmaps on your website, being really transparent about what you're doing, what you're building. And that kind of naturally took off. Like other people were posting about Baserow in certain communities, and that generated a lot of traction for me. I think if I would have been much closer or much closed compared to what I did, I might not have gotten that traction because people see that you are on a certain path with a certain vision and they believe in it and they want to promote that for you as well. So for me, it was being very, very transparent.
Complete utter luck. I'm half joking, but I personally believe it's a large part to do with timing. This is my own personal opinion on it, because like I'd seen the sort of the big movements of Linux, and then public cloud, and then containers, and then Kubernetes, and I really believed in Kubernetes. And it was just by chance to hire the right engineers with the right vision and same passion and alignment that actually our project came out of an interview project over a weekend that our first engineer did. We open sourced it, and before you knew it, boom, like people really needed it because it was automating Let's Encrypt. So it was partly luck, but partly actually being in the right place with the right time, with the right background and knowledge. And I would say to everyone in this room, you've all got your unique set of background and position, and you'll have sort of a competitive advantage based on what you know. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at Canonical and then MongoDB, so I had a few ideas of what was happening and where it was going. So I'd say I'd challenge all of you to just take advantage of the position that you've had and the knowledge you've got, because those opportunities will be sitting there waiting for you. You just need to take advantage of it and then put yourself in the right place. It's almost like having a good hand of poker. You know, you play that card when you've got it, and then something like that happens. And that was my personal experience of that.
I think also the early users that you have can be a very important part of that initial traction as well. We had the luck in the sense that the people who we were helping, maintainers, they were putting our software into lots and lots of places, and so we grew really quickly as a result of that. And then we also had kind of early flywheels, because since we were helping uncover what companies using software, they'd put that on their README of like, oh, here's the companies, and Scarf is the one that supplied this data. And so it kind of had some very natural, kind of growth flywheel mechanics that came with that. But it was really, even being able to ask the early users to do stuff like that, and just saying, it would really help if you would do this. Like, we'll do this thing for you. Would you tweet about us, or these kinds of things? Like at the very beginning, like that amount of momentum you get is really, really important, and just whatever amount of pushing forward you can do compounds over time.
Very true. I think just quickly is you got luck. Like the timing was perfect. The timing was perfect for you. I think that luck on timing. For you, I think you were already at 1. Like with the project, and so 1 to 100, right? And so for us it was a little bit different because we had to get from 0 to 1, and so how do we get from 0? And so rolling sleeves up was a lot of elbow grease on getting into the communities that already exist out there. There's DevOps communities on Slack, on Discord, finding the newsletters that people subscribe to, emailing the editors, trying to chat with TechCrunch or VentureBeat, trying to get into the Slack channels and talk to users. What's your problem? Hey, we're solving. Would you be interested in trying? We really hustled for the first 5 to 10 users to just find any way we could get in touch with people that would be relevant for our project. Things like Twitter ads, just working on finding who your ICP is, what message is going to resonate with them, drive them to your website. You don't even have to have a product. They can just look at the website, and if they like what they see, hit sign up, and you have a funnel of people that will use your product. GitHub stars, we're tracking those. There's, I think, generally speaking, whatever ways you can hustle to find the first 5 users will be the thing that will get you to the 100 users. But getting the first 5 is the hardest 5 you're going to get.
Okay, so I think we've reached a stage in the proceedings that we've got a decision to make.
Yep.
So the way this has been set up, for the next, I think we've got till is it till past? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So either we can keep this open forum and we can have some more questions, or we can go into smaller groups and tables and have a discussion, I suppose, about some of the topics that have come up, and anything else that's of interest to you. What would you prefer to do?
Second one.
Second one?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so what we need to do, we're going to have 1 founder per table. So can I ask, if you're a founder sitting at a table, would you mind standing up just so that others in the room know where to go to? And if you can just move about so we've got at least 1 founder per table, I think that would be great. Thank you. And you guys can be founders at tables as well, if that's okay.
I'm going to go find a table.
Go. Can the founders still stay standing up, please, just so that we can... And if you're at a table by yourself, you might want to go and join others. Interrupt just for a very quick second, because everyone does actually seem to be having a really good conversation. This session is formally over just now, but you're very welcome to stay and chat with one another, or even go and grab a coffee and come back and chat with one another. That's fine. But just to close off, would you mind if we just jumped around each table and just maybe tell us the key, what's the burning topic that you're having a discussion about? Okay, we'll start here. Yeah.
We were just talking about the pros and cons of telemetry in open source.
That's a good one.
Being able to learn more about how users use your software is valuable, but using it for aggressive sales is not.
Okay, okay, all right. Thank you. Anyone else on the other tables got anything they'd like to share?
Oh, that's awesome.
How about this table here? How did you guys get on?
He wants to speak.
We were having general conversations really about the experiences of the folks here. So I think, we had a great talk from France in terms of how he's, driving more momentum through his open source focused sort of company, and then we just moved on to talk about sort of market fit generally in terms of how we're trying to achieve that. But it's been very general, but very good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I don't actually mean to put anyone in the spot. I feel I did put you in the spot there, and I'm sorry. I apologise. Anyone else want to offer anything? Because if not, we'll say stay and chat or go and grab some coffee. Okay, I think that's...
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.